In the first session, we talked about how to get set up, and now we're going to move on to what to do in every session. Now, you should know and you should proceed by knowing that every student is an individual and not every tactic is going to work the same way with every student. But there are some things that you can do in each session or attempt to do in each session to kind of note the most common ways for approaching it. So the first thing you should do when you're handed a paper after you've looked over it is to praise specific parts of the paper. Many writers will struggle with writing, and many writers have poor confidence and they've been sort of traumatized by previous writing experiences, so they may be reluctant to even come to the center. And so Professor Donald Murray, he is a well-known scholar in the field of rhetoric and composition, says that any tutor or teacher can learn to praise with the following 5 words. I like the way you. And then you can fill in anything else that you find that's more specific for that person's paper that you think is valuable. If you can't find anything specific in the paper, you might want to talk about the student's passion for the topic if you can't find anything that's structurally good that you can praise. You want to find something to praise because studies in rhetoric and composition are showing that teachers are much more prone to note error and to hardly mark anything that's positive in a paper. And so this can be really destructive to a writer over time and can shut down the learning that might occur. If you praise the students now, they will be not only more receptive to you as a person, but they will be more receptive to your criticism later on, and their confidence won't be so shaky. You might also want to add that most high schools don't cover grammar, and this takes the pressure off of the student in sentence level or grammatical errors. A lot of high schools today are moving more to argument instead of teaching grammatical constructions, so just saying, you might not have covered this in your high school classes may take the pressure off. Also, don't use a red pen to assess the student's work. Some studies are showing that the red pen is psychologically damaging for students because of the color red, and so it may shut the student down to any further learning you might have in the session. Number 2, model how to determine the gist or point of each paragraph as written. This step helps tutors to identify global changes that are needed in the paper, these large-scale structural or organizational changes that need to be made, and it also brings those to light for the student. So if you are, you want the student to reorganize paragraphs, or if you find an idea that's present in body paragraph A, body paragraph B, and way down again at the end of the paper in body paragraph E, and you want the student to reorganize those points and put them together in one section, you have to first annotate the paper to show the student where those points are. So you can do this in many ways, and I'm going to suggest 2 ways. The first way is to annotate in the margins of each paragraph to show what the student has already said. And if you write on the side of a paragraph, you might write just a phrase saying this paragraph is about this topic. Then you move to body paragraph 2 and you say now you're shifting to this topic. And then you move to, you continue to go down and eventually have the student come up with those notes on the side margins so that the student is learning to pay attention to these global qualities of papers. In a second way, you can do a reverse outline of the paper that the student has already written. So you can take a paper, this is a popular strategy in many writing centers. You can have a paper and then have the student construct an outline based on what are the points that are already being discussed, and it's a more like full approach than just doing it paragraph by paragraph, but if you find with some advanced students that might help, you can choose to do that. This shows the student that some things are being talked about and they need to be grouped together, or things need to be organized in a different way. Maybe the paragraphs need to be organized sequentially or chronologically or some other structure that you notice. When you are done, make sure that the thesis, if it forecasts those main points, matches those paragraphs, and the thesis forecasts the main points in the order that the paragraphs are talked about in the paper. Number 3, ask the writer to find the thesis and make sure it's effective for the paper and the prompt. Sometimes the writer will not be sure what a thesis is. You might have to kind of explain that. You might have to redirect the writer when he or she thinks a thesis is one place, but it's actually later on in the paper. Oftentimes the thesis will even be in the conclusion of the paper, and then you'll show the writer, this is what you've been trying to get at the whole time. And then the writer will need to move that up to the end of the introductory matter and rearrange some of the body paragraphs so that it is in line with that thesis. Number 4, point out areas of confusion or ambiguity. Ryan and Zimmerelli in the Bedford Guide for Writing Tutors state that you shouldn't say things like, you didn't do this right. That's going to make a student writer shut down and feel a little bit more defensive. You should use I statements like, I'm confused by this, or as a reader, I'm not sure what you mean here. I've used that often when I tutor, and sometimes I'm just like, what do you mean by this? And then, as the writer proceeds to explain what he or she actually means, I'm writing it down on a scrap piece of paper, and I'm saying, now put that where this other line of information is, because that's much more clear. So you can try that strategy if it works for you. Number 5, recommend changes, but avoid writing on the student's paper. Ryan and Zimmerelli indicate that this respects the student, and it doesn't make the student feel as if the tutor is taking control of the paper. You can write small editing changes on the paper itself, but if you're reconstructing sentences, let the student do that on the paper. If you want to write some key phrases to incorporate, you can have that on a separate scrap sheet of paper, and the student can take that home. You can also use language such as, if I were you, I would do this, or I would change this in this way if I were you. It's the student's paper, not yours, and it's up to the student to decide whether or not he or she wants to take those suggestions. Always explain why you recommend a change. If you can't remember the rule, take time to look it up in front of the student so the student is learning where this information comes from and when to use it next time. It's not going to be as helpful for the student if you just make the changes without showing any explanations for why those changes need to be made. Use other tutors as references if you have questions. It's okay if you don't know absolutely everything. You can even make several different suggestions about correcting an error and have the student choose which he or she would like best. That would respect the student's ownership. Number 6, don't talk about writers in front of other students. This is a big one. Student writers may be reluctant to stay for a session or to come back for another session if they hear you talking about another writer and how terrible that writer's paper was or how terrible of a writer that person was in front of everyone. You don't want to be sending this kind of message. Number 7, Ryan and Zimmerelli suggest, do not respond to questions about future grades. If a question is asked of you such as, what grade do you think this paper will get? Do not answer it. Say, I'm not the teacher. I'm here to help you better your paper and help you address the rubric, but only your teacher can give you that grade. Because if you say, I think it's probably an A paper, and the student gets a C, the student will be very upset. So you don't want to give any projections, forecasting for the grades. Never criticize a grade a teacher has already given. It doesn't help. You can point to areas of the prompt that match or do not match up with the student's writing on a graded paper to help the writer understand what happened, but never criticize a grade a teacher has already given.